Hello and welcome to the CBV podcast.
Hello and welcome, my name is Cloud, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on the movie The Suicide Squad. First I'll be giving you my non-spoiler review, and then I will give you a clear warning before going into my full-on spoiler talk. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on specific moments, stick around for that later, or you can skip to it using the time codes provided in the description below. So, if you have no idea what the Suicide Squad is, this is a DC movie that basically is about the government planting explosives into the necks of a number of criminals and forcing them to go on extremely dangerous missions. And if they refuse any orders given to them, then the explosives in their necks will detonate and kill them. That's the basic concept of this DC property. This movie can be considered both a sequel to the original 2016 Suicide Squad and a reboot. I mean, there's no direct connection in the story between these two Suicide Squad movies, so in that way it can be considered to be seen as a reboot. But, you know, you could also look at this film as a sequel to the original because it does make some very casual and vague references to the history of the returning characters. For example, Amanda Waller, she's talking to the team as if the Suicide Squad has been put together in the past multiple times. So, you know, they've established a history with Task Force X, and, you know, kind of hinted that this has been an ongoing thing many times before. We also have a moment, you know, or moments between Captain Boomerang and Harley Quinn. You know, that you can tell from their interaction with each other that they've already met before, and they've kind of got this now, you know, sort of friendship, camaraderie thing going on. They definitely have a familiarity with each other, and so it just kind of proves that this isn't their first mission together. We also get a moment where Harley briefly references her past relationships with the Joker. When she's talking about her bad track record of boyfriends. It's not like she directly says the Joker, but the way she talks about it, it's very obvious that this is a reference to her previous relationship with him. The first thing I want to talk about with this movie, personally, I kind of like to think of it both as a sequel and a reboot. I think I think in a way it should be advertised as a reboot because you don't really need to see the first movie to understand what's going on. If you have, you know, any knowledge of the, you know, Suicide Squad and DC Comics in general, you could get straight to this movie and just watch it. But if you literally have no idea what the Suicide Squad is, I guess it would help if you watch the first movie. But personally, I think this is a great film that stands on its own. What I love about this movie is that it has a very strong opening and it wastes no time. You know, it just gets straight into recruiting the villains into the Suicide Squad, planting the bombs in their necks and sending them on their mission. So I love the fact that this movie just gets straight to it. The opening of the movie also sets the tone, the style and the stakes very well for this film, and it lets the audience know that anything can happen. It says, hey, no one is safe. This is a very violent movie, but it's going to be a very crazy fun time. So I do love the way that this movie just kind of opens up, gets you straight into this world, and you know, all the bizarreness happens very quickly into the movie, so you just have to be on board for the ride. The mission in this Suicide Squad movie, compared to the last one, it's much better and it feels more like a mission. The mission here is handled much better. It just feels like there's a much larger spectacle to what's going on. In the first movie, I guess it's kind of like a witch hunt that takes place in an abandoned city near Gotham. So, you know, there's only so much you can do with that setting and spectacle when it pretty much takes place in one night. Whereas here, the mission in the Suicide Squad takes place across like 2 days outside of American territory. And, you know, it has this 70s war movie aesthetic to it. So you can get a great variety of seeing the setting shot both in the day and in the night, as well as a variety of locations such as the Suicide Squad being on a beach, being in the jungle, being in the city, in nightclubs, a laboratory. You know, it's just much more locations and environments that you can enjoy seeing the Suicide Squad in compared to the first film. Also, it seems like James Gunn really tried to make this film with as many practical locations as possible. And I'm pretty sure he even built real sets as much as he could rather than just relying on a lot of CGI for the backgrounds. So I really appreciate seeing these actors actually, you know, act in these locations, and it just helps add to this R-rated 70s war aesthetic. It's kind of almost got a slightly grindhouse feeling style, just because you can tell that, you know, these characters are actually swimming through the water. They're actually standing on all this rubble that the studios built for the film. It just kind of, you know, the more things you can really actually add physically into the production of the movie, the more it does have this kind of gritty, fun feel to it. The amount of time and distance that the Suicide Squad travel along this mission, trying to get past enemies, also helps this feel like a really dangerous and risky mission where the odds are really stacked against them this time. And the fact that nearly all of these characters aren't very well known, it just helps make you think that anyone could be killed off, whereas in the first movie, I never really felt the stakes for those characters, because that team in the first movie consisted of, you know, very popular and fairly well-known villains like Killer Croc and Deadshot and Harley. So, you know, you didn't really feel any stakes, because you could tell that the studio, if there was ever an opportunity to use these characters in their own movies or future movies, they weren't going to risk killing off these quite well-known characters. So, you know, in this movie, it was just so refreshing for a comic book movie like this to use a lot of unknown and obscure characters to make the danger of death feel much more real. I mean, I know James Gunn in the past has been saying the thing that's missing in these comic book movies is stakes. Like, you don't really feel like anyone's going to die because they're very well-known and popular characters. And, you know, typically studios don't want to kill off, you know, popular characters that they can make money out of. So I appreciate James Gunn taking this much more different approach and allowing us to get to know characters that we probably haven't even heard of before. So I do really appreciate the total shift on what he's done to the comic book genre, like he has in Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, he's just using characters no one's really ever heard of, and before he made them into movies, you know, they probably were never going to be popular. So he's just doing that great thing. He's just got this great skill for taking really, really obscure characters and making us really feel for them and really want to get to know these characters the way he portrays them on screen in his writing and directing. So yeah, it's just a great job with letting us get to know these you know, basically unknown characters. It's nice to, you know, not have an expectation for a certain comic book character you may have read. You know, like if you're watching a Spider-Man movie, you know who Spider-Man is, and so therefore going into a Spider-Man movie, you have a certain expectation of what you want Spider-Man to do. But with the Suicide Squad, you've got characters like Weasel, Polka Dot Man, Savant, Bloodsport. You know, I hadn't heard of any of these characters, really, and so it was nice to not have an expectation of what they should act like, because I haven't really seen them portrayed on screen before or really read them in the comic books, just because they're that obscure of characters. But yeah, actually that's the one thing I think the MCU has a problem with, because, you know, they announce all their big projects in advance, so you tend to have a good idea of who's going to survive. You know, in a movie like Endgame, it's supposed to be this massive movie that, you know, anyone could die in this movie, and it's true, like anyone could die in this movie, but because the Marvel announced their future MCU movies in advance, you know that certain characters aren't going to die. You know, okay, well, Spider-Man's not going to die because he's got a movie coming out straight after Endgame. Black Panther's not going to die because he's got a second movie coming out. Doctor Strange has had his second movie announced. So, you know, the MCU kind of has a problem with announcing things too far in advance, because, you know, it kind of spoils the stakes for the current movies they're releasing. So I just love that anything could happen in the Suicide Squad, because, you know, even though DC has announced, you know, their future plans for movies, there's been no announcements in connection with the Suicide Squad. So really, you know, anything can happen, anyone can die. And I find that so refreshing. I think it was such a genius idea for James Gunn to handle it in this way with these types of characters. Now let's move on to talking about the deaths in the movie. So that was a big thing for me going to it. I felt like, you know, I need to see some deaths in the Suicide Squad. If you've got a team of people who are going on a mission that's likely to kill them, and they've got the threat of having, you know, bombs planted in their heads, I kind of want to see a lot of team members die. Not all of them, just enough to make it feel like, yeah, there are stakes. But I also didn't want the deaths to be predictable. I did want to be surprised by the deaths, and have that feeling of, oh my god, is this the moment where this character dies? Is this going to be the moment where this character dies? I just kind of wanted it to feel, like you shouldn't get too comfortable with these characters too soon. But yeah, I was actually surprised by by some of the deaths in this movie. I mean, they are called the Suicide Squad, and the slogan for this film is "Do not get attached." So obviously you should go into this film knowing that team members will be killed off unapologetically. And if you didn't know that going into it, then I actually would love to, have seen your reaction when watching this movie. But yes, I was surprised at some deaths in this movie. I wasn't necessarily shocked at who died, just based on the trailers that were being released for the film and the marketing stuff. But I was more surprised at when certain characters died and how they died. There was in fact one death that I was genuinely surprised by, and it actually made me feel very strongly towards that particular character. That's all I'll say for now. I'll go into it more in the spoiler section of this podcast. But yeah, even though I thought maybe perhaps certain characters, it wasn't a surprise that they would die, I was very surprised in a few moments of how they died or when they died. So yeah, I was very pleased to walk out of the film feeling like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That was a great moment in the movie. So yeah, I think they handled the deaths pretty well in the movie. The R rating, let's talk about that. I am very happy with the use of the R rating in the Suicide Squad. I mean, just the Suicide Squad as a concept and a property is one that really benefits from the blood and gore, much like Logan, Deadpool, and Joker. I mean, it's about a group of supervillains who will get their heads blown up if they refuse any orders. So it really does lend itself to a more adult audience in nature. And in this movie, you will see how effective those implanted bombs are if someone doesn't follow orders. And to be honest, this might be the most gory and bloody comic book movie I've ever seen, more so than the Deadpool movies, and they're pretty violent. I think this one tops it. This might be the most violent comic book movie I've ever seen, and it's just glorious. The way it handles the blood and gore is just insanity, but done really well and in a really fun way. It really takes advantage of the R rating, not only for comedy, but even to the point where there is, some slight body horror in one particular scene. The movie also has a ton of swearing, some moments of nudity, and of course, insane violence and gore. So the R rating was really, really needed. I mean, when you watch the first Suicide Squad movie, seeing that without the blood and gore just kind of feels weird now after seeing this movie. So I think this movie proved that this was one of those comic book properties that needed to be made with an R rating as far as a film goes. Now let's talk about the cast and characters. No one gave a bad performance. Everyone clearly wanted to be there and gave 100% of their efforts into their portrayals of these characters. The casting was perfect for every character. Each character is just as entertaining to watch, no matter how long or short their screen time is. There's some characters, some of the characters that die first, I could have easily just watched the whole movie with those characters instead of the ones we got, but vice versa. I'm also happy we got to hang around with the characters we did for as long as we did, because literally they're all just so entertaining. It really didn't matter almost which ones were killed off and which ones wasn't, because the cast just did such a great job at making me entertained by watching all of them on screen. So that was also a big thing. If you didn't cast these characters right, it could have been quite risky to kill certain characters off and keep other ones alive. But because everyone's doing as good a job as each other, it almost didn't matter, because I had a great time with all of them while they were on screen. Some of the standout characters for me, based on their performance and how they were used in the film, was Michael Rooker as Savant. I loved his intro and the way they demonstrated his skills in the cell. Peter Capaldi as the Thinker. I just think he's perfect to play an evil genius. Idris Elba as Bloodsport. He's just so good at playing an intimidating badass who, He actually has some surprisingly great comedic moments. So he was really good in the role as Bloodsport. So Idris Elba, yeah, he was stealing some scenes. But that's not to say I hated any other characters or had any specific favorites. Those were just the few performances that stood out in my head as, yeah, I really had a great time watching them. But the others were just as good. It's just the way they handled certain characters. I had a bit more of a fun time watching them. The genius thing about this movie is that James Gunn has brought to life characters I really didn't know a lot about, and he's made them all so entertaining as individuals that, I would have been happy to have seen the majority of the movie with any of these villains. I know I've said that before, but I've just got to really praise their performances. They were that good. For the characters that do get most of the screen time in the movie, he does a great job at giving the team members small moments where, we get to know how they became villains, what motivates them, and what do they want out of life, what do they need, what are they yearning for. And half the time, this kind of, our understanding of these characters is not even given just from dialogue alone. Sometimes, we just focus on what the character is looking at or how they interact with the rest of the team to get a better understanding of who they are. Like, it's really great that James Gunn gives these characters these little moments, and it kind of, sometimes without even saying anything, it just gives you a great idea of what they're thinking about. So it's just one of James Gunn's strengths is to kind of humanize these really wild characters. One other thing that I really liked about this movie is the returning characters that he brings back from the first film are used much better and are improved upon. He really takes advantage of these characters. So, for example, Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, she is way more vicious and intense in this movie. Compared to the first one, she was tame in that first one, but in this sequel, she really has some really intense scenes where you really feel how much damage she could do if you get on her bad side. So it was really great to see that come out of that character and that actress, because that actress was already amazing as Amanda Waller in the first one, but man, James Gunn really gave her some great scenes to work with. Harley Quinn is utilized here probably better than the first movie and Birds of Prey. I mean, she's not necessarily a character that I love to see constantly. I do think she works better in an ensemble than necessarily in her own movie, although I really did enjoy the Birds of Prey movie. Sometimes re-watching that movie, I do realise that Harley Quinn can sometimes get a bit too much for me. Not too badly. Just there's little moments where I'm like, I kind of wish there was more characters that we were focusing on, because I don't think Harley Quinn, at least the version that Margot Robbie's been doing, I think she works better in an ensemble more than having all the attention on her. But in the Suicide Squad, she works really well because James Gunn gives her these great scenes amongst all these other characters that she's interacting with. So yeah, I think Harley Quinn is utilised here better than the other two movies. Captain Boomerang, played by Jai Courtney, has better dialogue here and actually gets to show how deadly his boomerangs really are. Captain Boomerang was probably my favourite character from the last film, and I think he was handled, fairly well. I think he had some good lines and good moments, but they didn't really get to show how deadly he could be or what his boomerangs could really do. Like in the first movie, he threw, I think, 2 boomerangs. No, he threw 3 boomerangs. He threw 1 boomerang in the beginning to knock out one of his heist teammates or whatever, to kind of double cross him. So he just used it to knock him out. He threw another boomerang at Katana just to distract her, I guess. And then he threw 1 more boomerang at the end, which I guess was used as a camera. Those are the only 3 moments I remember him doing anything with those boomerangs. I mean, I guess he used them as knives, but that's not really the same thing. Like, you kind of want to see him do something crazy throwing a boomerang rather than holding them in his hands and slicing enemies up. But yeah, you really get to see how deadly his boomerangs are in this movie. They did a great job giving him those particular moments. Rick Flag, a character I didn't care about in the first movie. He actually feels fun and as important to be a part of the Suicide Squad here in the sequel. He was the most improved character from the first movie. I'm really surprised at how well James Gunn handled Rick Flag. Like in the first one, like he was the last character I cared about. I was like, yeah, whatever, let's skip past his scenes. Cool, Suicide Squad, let's focus on these criminals. But Rick Flag is just as entertaining in this movie as any other character. He did a great job, and I think it just goes to show Joel Kinnaman was right for this role. I never thought he wasn't right for the role in the first one. I just thought he had nothing really interesting to do. But in this one, James Gunn gives him some great action scenes, some great dialogue, and even his costume was way better, like giving him this bright yellow t-shirt. When I first saw that t-shirt in like the promotional material, I thought, oh, that looks way better. I mean, I don't know if it makes sense for his character, but then when you watch it in the context of the movie, it makes sense why he's wearing that t-shirt. And it just, everything he does with Rick Flag is just elevated way more than what they did with him in the first movie. So James Gunn, well done for making potentially one of the most unlikable characters from the first film one of the greatest characters in this film. Well done. Actually, even the Amanda Waller's employees in this sequel, in this reboot, whatever you want to call it, in the Suicide Squad, the employees of Amanda Waller are way more improved. They've actually given them individual characters and memorable lines. In the first movie, they're all just drones typing on a computer. They're all just faceless people, just in the shadows, in the background, just typing on computers and getting on with work. But in this one, we actually get to know a little bit about the staff members in this movie, and it's just great. I guess they're like the computer tech guys. I mean, they're kind of like responsible for keeping track of the Suicide Squad members, finding them like the best paths to go down. They're that kind of employees of Amanda Waller. But they've just got so much personality and character, and I love them. In the first movie, we don't focus on anyone. But in this one, not only are they given some personalities, but we do cut back and forth between what the Suicide Squad are doing and what Amanda and her employees are doing in the office space. And they had some great lines of dialogue. Like it was really great. Actually, you even get an insight, now that I think about it. When you watch scenes of them interacting with Amanda Waller, you even get scenes of what her employees are probably thinking as they're seeing Amanda Waller being quite despicable to these to the Suicide Squad. And a kind of, you can see their opinion and attitudes forming towards her as they see what she's really capable of and how far she will go to get these missions completed. I mean, one of the biggest laughs of the film for me came from a great line of dialogue from one of the staff members, and it was just so unexpected and out of left field. And the line delivery of that moment, it just killed me. I was just because you wouldn't expect one of the funniest lines to come from one of the guys who work on the computers for Amanda Waller, because the first movie just sets you up to just assume, the same thing will happen here. But in this movie, he gives everyone character. I mean, anyone you see on screen, he gives them character, even if they're on for a couple of seconds or on for, the entire movie. He just does a great job at writing characters, no matter how big or small their role in the movie is. Now let's talk about the villain. There isn't really technically one particular villain in this movie. There's kind of multiple villains, or enemies, I guess I should say, and they're all kind of connected to each other, and they all play a different part in their plan and operation of their like evil schemes. But if you've seen the trailer, you'll know who the big villain is that the Suicide Squad actually have to fight. So if you've seen that, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it's very well handled. Considering who that character is they're fighting, it's handled really well. Overall, that character fits the tone of the movie very well. James Gunn actually manages, surprisingly, to establish that character's motivations in such a way that's way easier to understand than when, Enchantress in the first movie. I didn't really understand what she was about. I know she wanted to, like, rule the planet and rule humanity, but she was making some weird comparisons between her and technology, and I didn't really understand what she was making. Like, it was just a bit confusing. But in this one, with this absurd character, somehow they made it way easier to understand even that character's motivations, and it seemed more, it still seemed larger than life, that you're like, how would the Suicide Squad take them down? But when you see it play out in the movie, it kind of starts making more sense. Oh, okay, no, they could handle themselves pretty well against this thing. It wouldn't be easy, but there's a logical chance that they could defeat this character. But yeah, it was just amazing how James Gunn handled such a bizarre character so well. I mean, on face value, you'd think on paper, like, this is really stupid. No one's going to take this character seriously. It's one of the most ridiculous characters from DC Comics. But, when they build up the slow reveal of the character, they surprisingly do a really good job at making them feel very creepy and deadly. So it's kind of amazing how much better that villain is, considering, how in a different director's hands that could have backfired so much. But I have to praise the use of that villain, because he's bizarre, he's weird, he fits perfectly in the movie, and they just do a great job at writing scenes around them. But at the end of the day, this whole movie is nothing but villains. So, really, the Suicide Squad are just a group of criminals that are forced into a really, crap situation. But, it all works very well with the dark humor and the tone of the film. It's just, this whole movie's basically full of villains, but it's each character, they're all handled really well. The soundtrack, I think the big criticism with the first movie was that the soundtrack, it makes the film feel a bit like a long music video, as they kind of use obvious, well-known songs, and they seem to only be used for introducing characters or for specific character moments. I can definitely see and understand that criticism, but you'll be happy to know that the song choices for this film are used a lot more effectively in the Suicide Squad. First of all, they aren't the most obvious song choices either. It was nice to see James Gunn bring some less known songs back into the public eye, much like how he did with the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtracks. The songs are also used less as character themes like in the first one, and they used more for setting atmosphere for the locations and sequences in this movie. They're just handled way better. Like, the way he incorporates music just works perfectly. Also, both Suicide Squad movies have had artists create songs for their soundtrack specifically for the movie. And I can confidently say the new song Rain by Grandson and I think her name is Jessie Reyes, that song on its own is better than all the songs made for the first movie, like Sucker for Pain and Purple Lamborghini. This song blows them out of the water, just because it's not such an obvious song to use. When you hear the title Rain, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like a very Suicide Squad song. Like, if you thought someone was going to write a song for that movie, you wouldn't think a song called Rain would be it, but when it's incorporated into the movie, it works perfectly. I mean, when I heard that song in the trailer, I was like, that's an interesting song. Like, I know there's rain in one scene, but like, really? This is the song that's written for the Suicide Squad? But, when you watch it in context of the film, it's used perfectly. So that's all the great things I had to say about the movie. Is there anything I didn't like about the movie? I do have a few things to say that I didn't hate them. It's just thoughts I had, this could be improved upon, or, I could have done without this. First, I think James Gunn has created such a populated world with these characters. It's almost like his own universe. Like, not this movie isn't really connected to any of the other DCEU movies, but there's so many characters in here. It just feels very much like a James Gunn DC universe. There's just tons of things that I would love to have seen from characters that don't make it till the end of the movie. That is kind of a nitpick for me. I do know that, no matter who we killed or who survived, I'd kind of probably always want to see more of the characters that didn't make it. So that's just a small nitpick. Maybe, I guess, I would have liked to have seen certain characters survive just a bit longer so I could have got to see them on screen for longer. But there are two small things I would have probably preferred to see in this film specifically. First, I would have liked the death of the Suicide Squad members to be scattered a bit more, I guess, evenly across the film. If you have seen the film, you'll know what I mean, because I think some unlikely characters, it would have been cool to have seen them survive longer, just to make the deaths feel a bit more unpredictable. Like, okay, I thought this character was going to die, but they've kept him around a bit longer, and you can still kill them off later, but I think it kind of the way they handle the deaths works, and it doesn't if you've seen the film. you'll know what I mean. I'm trying to like not talk about spoilers, but yeah, I guess the overall thought is I wish the deaths were scattered a bit more evenly, just so it feels like a kind of ticking bomb of, I mean, someone's gonna, it hasn't been a death for a little while, someone's gonna die. But no, you kind of, the way the deaths are handled, I think sometimes I kind of forget that they could still die just because of, you know, how much deaths happen in certain sections of the movie and how much there aren't deaths happening in certain other sections of the movie. So yeah, that's my first thing. Have deaths scattered a little bit more further across the film, just to make them feel more unpredictable. Secondly, I loved Peter Capaldi's portrayal as the Thinker, as I've already said. He was one of my favourite characters to watch, but we didn't ever actually get to see him use his super intelligence to its full potential. He's just kind of known to be super smart, but you never really get to see him do anything particularly genius, so I think you could have done more with him. I would have just loved to have seen one scene dedicated to demonstrating the power of his mind. That's what he's known for. But really, the movie just says, yeah, he's super smart, like, just take our word for it. And you're like, okay. I think if it wasn't Peter Capaldi doing that performance, I think I would have had way more issues with it. But because he's so engaging, and because of the characters he's played in the past, I do believe that Peter Capaldi is that smart in that role. So, it's not the biggest issue, but it would have been nice to have seen him demonstrate his superpower, basically. And lastly, I actually think you could have trimmed one scene in particular down, and that is the romantic Princess Castle Harley Quinn scene. It was one scene in the movie where I kind of lost quite a bit of interest because it was a little bit overkill for me. If you cut out the musical section of that whole sequence, and I'm not talking about the fight sequence, I'm talking about the romantic setting that they put her in for an entire scene. I'm pretty sure if you cut that out, everything would have still made sense and actually been maybe a bit more effective, because it would have looked like, if you cut that out or trimmed it down way down, it would have looked like we were going to go in that direction of having an entire musical scene of her having a bit of romance. But then, if you kind of cut it early before we get into that scene, it would have had a surprise and kind of a left turn before it went any further. I just think that could have been handled a bit better. I guess I'm just kind of sick of seeing Harley in having, relationship problems. And I think this was a great opportunity to have the first film where she isn't focusing on relationships. Or maybe has grown. I mean, it does demonstrate that she's grown, but maybe it could have been a misdirect, but no, they kind of went through with the fact that she's still allowing herself to kind of fall too quickly for people. Apart from that, that's really my only main criticisms, or that I wasn't too keen on in the movie. I might go more into some stuff in the spoiler section, but that's my spoiler-free problems or little nitpicks with the movie. My overall conclusion, I really love this movie. It's so funny, it has so much energy. It's like a roller coaster ride with how much it twists and turns and changes from comedy to action to some drama to a little bit of horror. It's just got a nice blend of different elements and themes in this movie. You can really tell James Gunn had a vision for the Suicide Squad, and the studio really clearly did let him make the movie he wanted to make. I mean, if you've seen James Gunn's other films like Sliver, Super, and Guardians of the Galaxy, this film really does feel like a combination of all those movies put together in the best possible way. And that's one of the reasons that The Suicide Squad is my favourite James Gunn film so far. It also feels like a combination of the best elements from the 2016 Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, and even Deadpool, especially Deadpool 2. So, I would really highly recommend this film if you're a fan of any of those films at all, or like the kind of tones and genres those films are. This is easily my favourite DCEU movie, and it's probably in my top 3 favourite DC movies of all time. So yeah, high praise for this movie. I think James Gunn just did a fantastic job, and I think you'll really enjoy it if you just let yourself go and just go with the ride. So let's now move on to my spoiler talk for the Suicide Squad. So just warning you now, Spoilers, if you haven't seen the movie and don't want to know any spoilers before you get a chance to see it, leave this section or just pause it, go watch the movie and come back and join us for the spoiler talk. But if you haven't seen it, spoilers, I'm going to be talking details. Okay, 3, 2, 1. You've been warned. Okay, so here are some of my favourite moments in this movie. I loved using Michael Rooker's character as Savant to lead us into the recruitment process of the Suicide Squad. He was the one character in the first team who left the biggest impression on me from his performance, and you know, I was actually sad to see him die because I would have loved to have seen him actually fight some enemies, just based on the way he demonstrated his skills in his cell, and I would have loved to have seen him interact more with team members. Michael Rooker is just such a great actor, and I would have loved to have seen him actually become a bigger member of the Suicide Squad. I also loved the way they handled the deaths and made them just such hilarious moments, like Weasel drowning. I mean, obviously he's revealed to be alive in the post-credit scene, but, you know, it was just so funny to see that, you know, Weasel, you know, on face value, it looked like he literally died after taking one step off the helicopter. That might have been one of the funniest deaths in the movie. And also TDK lying on the ground screaming while his floating arms are being shot at, and even Polka Dot Man being crushed after his superhero moment. Although I will say, that superhero line Polka Dot Man gives in the trailer, I was like, oh, okay, well that's going to be his last line in the movie. So I could kind of see that coming, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless, just because it's a great way to handle that. And as much as I wish the deaths were evenly spread across the film, as I mentioned earlier, it was crazy to see how Amanda Waller purposely sacrificed the first Suicide Squad team just to use as a distraction while the second team safely crossed the beach. I mean, it just goes to show how ruthless and cold-hearted she is. So even though I would have liked to have seen the death scattered more, it still totally works the way he uses it in the movie. I think just the promotional material kind of, for me, maybe it's because I'm really good at analysing shots from just looking at things only a few times, but it did feel obvious that he was going to kill these team members off and they weren't going to last particularly long in the movie. But I was really surprised how quickly they died, but I just wasn't surprised that they died early in the movie and it was those particular characters. But yeah, it was just a great way to demonstrate how Amanda Waller just doesn't care at all about the humanity of these characters whatsoever. To her, they're just scum and they're very disposable, and she'll happily sacrifice them knowing that they're going to die if it means others can move forward with the mission. So yeah, it works both ways. I can see people having a problem with him killing the first team, but I think if you haven't watched the trailers, I think you'd enjoy it more, or just be way more shocked, because I think the trailers give away the fact that there's not many scenes with some of these characters. It was also so satisfying to see Savant's head explode, just because it doesn't work to see it without the blood in the original movie. In the first one, you have Slipknot, I think his name is, and he's just there to demonstrate that the bombs are real in the necks, but it just doesn't look right. It's just the head kind of disappears and there's smoke coming out of his neck. It doesn't work nearly as well as the way you see Savant's head literally blow up into chunks, with the blood and gore and the practical effects. So it looked really good. And also, I like that the movie was willing to kill off some returning characters, such as Captain Boomerang and Rick Flag. Both of those deaths surprised me for completely different reasons. So, you know, I wasn't surprised that Captain Boomerang died, and again, it's just based on how much he was featured in the marketing of the movie. So it didn't surprise me that he was going to die, but I mean, the movie does also warn you not to get attached to the characters, so it kind of slightly implies that they're willing to kill off characters we were already familiar with. But I was surprised how early in the film Captain Boomerang did die, and I do appreciate that James Gunn had the balls to kill off someone who was actually one of the popular characters from the first movie. He just killed him off very quickly to establish, hey, I know a lot of you like Captain Boomerang, but I'm sorry, but you're going to have to learn that anyone can die in this movie, and, you know, you may not like it, but that's just the way this movie's being handled. So I just think it was a great way to demonstrate that. Although, I would have loved to have seen him survive just a little longer, because he only got to, throw one boomerang, and admittedly, it was the best thing he's ever done with a boomerang across the two movies. But man, I would have loved to have seen Captain Boomerang just do a little bit more. But it was still handled fine for what the movie needed. Everything James Gunn did with the deaths, as far as what the movie needed, it was done the way it was needed. But as a fan of these characters now, and fans of these new characters, I just would have loved to have seen some of them survive just a little longer to get some more interactions. I also think the fact that he killed Captain Boomerang in that way was just a great contrast to how he was being super confident in the helicopter and teasing the rest of the team of how, he's surrounded by amateurs who are likely going to die. And, even though he's barely in the film, he still has funnier lines than the first movie. Jai Courtney's performance is great, and I do feel a bit bad for him. It'd be cool if we could get him featuring in another movie, whether it's a prequel or whatever, or just an unconnected movie. But I would like to see Jai Courtney still appear in another movie, whether or not they have to do something with the timeline. I feel bad for the guy, because this is probably his best character that people love him to do. I mean, I've seen some Jai Courtney performances, and I think the only other Jai Courtney performance I actually really enjoyed was seeing him in Liam Neeson's movie Honest Thief. I think he was great in that. But apart from that, he's never really stood out to me as an amazing actor or a charming actor. But him as Captain Boomerang is the best thing he's ever done. So hopefully this isn't officially the end. Hopefully they can do some, timeline manipulation to get him back into another movie. But yeah, I loved how the contrast of Captain Boomerang dying early was a great way to prove that he's such a cocky character who isn't, he's too overconfident, and that's why he died so early. Having said that, I was actually way more surprised when Rick Flag was killed, and for me it was the most effective death, because I literally thought he would be safe the entire movie, just because I assumed he would be needed to lead future Suicide Squad teams for the franchise. Because, I mean, I haven't read a lot of Suicide Squad comics, but he is the go-to guy for leading the Suicide Squad. And the fact they killed him, again, a great demonstration to show, hey, look, we are willing to kill these characters off. So, Rick Flag's death was the one that got to me the most. It was the only one where I felt an emotion inside for that character. I was just very surprised that James Gunn managed to get a reaction out of me for Rick Flag, because, as I said, Rick Flag was an unlikable character for me in the first one, and I don't think it's because you're supposed to like him necessarily. I just think he was boring in the first movie, and the fact that James Gunn managed to, in just one movie, make Rick Flag really likable and then kill him off, I just thought it was really well handled. I mean, especially with Rick Flag's motivation, in this movie he's given a bit more depth, and James Gunn's writing and Joel Kinnaman's acting does a great job at selling the character's dedication to serving his country, and he's a good team player. He's not willing to leave anyone behind. With Harley Quinn getting captured, he's like, we got to go back for her, we can't leave her behind, she can help us out, and she would do the same for us. So they just made him way more likable, so therefore the death was way more effective. So I was really happy that the film managed to genuinely surprise me with a death, because I honestly had no fear about Rick Flag dying. I had a lot of confidence that he was going to survive. Other than that, the only other character I thought was really, really unlikely to die was Harley Quinn, and that's just based on the fact that she's the only one in the movie who's managed to get her own her own solo movie, and she's featured in the previous Suicide Squad movie, so I thought, she's kind of Warner Brothers moneymaker at the minute, so I can't really see them killing her. Although I would have really applauded James Gunn if he'd been able to get away with killing Harley Quinn. Not because I don't like her, I just think it would have been really surprising based on how much money she just makes as a character for this studio. But yeah, that's kind of all I've got to say about the deaths. They were just, the Rick Flag was the best death as far as shocking me, and Captain Boomerang's death was just a great way to set up that anyone can die. And even when Captain Boomerang died, I still didn't feel any I didn't feel any dread for the other returning characters, because I thought, well, I guess it makes sense that you're going to kill off Captain Boomerang, because, you know, no one's asking for a Captain Boomerang movie, so kind of makes sense. But man, they really got me. They really caught me off guard with that Rick Flag death. Let's move on to the soundtrack. The soundtrack is fantastic. I think the best use of any song in the whole film is a song called People Who Died by the Jim Carroll Band. It perfectly sums up the movie's high kill count. It's used in the opening credits sequence of the movie when you know you're seeing all these corpses on the beach. It's just a great way to use that song, and just matches James Gunn's tone and style very well. I also love seeing other DC villains making cameos in the prison, like Calendar Man. I thought that was really cool to bring Calendar Man in it just for a quick little cameo. And there was 2 other cameos. It was weird because there was 2 other characters in the prison that I'm like, you're clearly 2 comic book characters that haven't been made up for this movie. You're clearly actual characters from the comics. I've just never seen you before, and I've never heard of you. But now after seeing the movie, I had to go research who they were. So it was very cool that James Gunn, even with the cameos, he's still putting in obscure characters. It's not like he's going to put a cameo in of a well-known character. It's like, oh no, cool. I mean, you've got still some obscure characters even in the background. So I really enjoyed that. It just kind of added to the world building and kind of how weird some of these inmates are that we're not focusing on. I also enjoyed seeing the teammates' dynamics with each other, like Ratcatcher and Bloodsport kind of have this father and daughter dynamic, which is, I felt fitted pretty well considering their own family dynamics and their own family problems. And I also Bloodsport and Peacemaker trying to one up each other when they're killing people. I think that's really entertaining to watch, and that's a great dynamic. Harley Quinn's escape fight sequence, that was her best scene in the whole movie. Harley Quinn escaping from bad guys, and the way she fights and the way we see into her mind, it was perfectly wacky to show the fight from her perspective. You see the flowers forming around her, and they're kind of replacing the blood she sheds from her victims, almost like she doesn't feel the impact of the consequences because she's not seeing blood. All she's seeing is flowers spewing from these people's bodies, and the song that she was singing before she escapes, when she was being interrogated, they use that in the fight scene, and it just makes sense because that's the song she was thinking of in her mind before she escaped, and that's a song she's probably still thinking of. So it was almost like Walking Phoenix, his Joker and music, like in the end of the Joker movie. Spoilers if you haven't seen the end of the Joker movie, but in the end you can see him singing "That's Life" by Frank Sinatra, but then he's singing it with the soundtrack of the movie, so it kind of indicates that the soundtrack of the movie is in his head. So it just had that same vibe that was very well used for Harley Quinn's fight scene. The Thinker scene in the lab was really dark, with the way they were showing the experiments with the civilians and the starfish. And just seeing Peter Capaldi swear again is just the right. It just feels so right to see the actor swearing on the screen again, just based on his previous roles he's done in the past. But yeah, that scene of him showing the Suicide Squad, all the experiments, it was really messed up. Seeing people, half alive, and the fact that these starfish, when they attach themselves to your face, that's you gone. There's no coming back from that. Also, I like the slow reveal, as I mentioned, of who I'll now say is Starro. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who didn't realise from the trailers, but yeah, the main bad guy is Starro, and I love the way they slowly revealed him. Seeing him speak through the people he's taken over in the cells, and seeing Peter Capaldi hanging up in front of his giant eye actually surprised me in the way that they managed to make Starro feel like an actual real threat. They managed to make him feel creepy and actually deadly before he actually even we see his full reveal as he escapes the building. But yeah, I was really surprised that they managed to make Starro creepy. I wasn't expecting that, because I thought he was just going to be a fun, silly character, and they're like, no, it's kind of messed up what Starro can do, and I appreciated that. I also loved the running joke that Polka Dot Man was always seeing his mum everywhere, and my favourite line out of the whole movie might be Bloodsport shouting, "It's your mum!" Like, that's, I wasn't expecting Idris Elba to have a really funny line like that, but the way that joke just kept running throughout the entire movie, it was just the perfect way to finish that joke. And Idris Elba says it so well, so that's always going to be stuck in my head now. King Shark killing is always fun in the movie, but it was especially fun to see him have his Hulk smash moment when he's told at the end that, you know, Starro is his food. They say monster num num. The way he reacts to hearing that he can eat the monster, and the way he runs with joy and jumps high in the air at Starro, just gave me like kind of Hulk in Avengers flashbacks in a good way, when, you know, they say Hulk smash and he jumps in the air and destroys everything. So it felt like a nice parallel to that DC kind of got their sort of Hulk smash moment. You know, I thought it was kind of cool. And the last thing I can think of is the use of the title cards that were being integrated with the shots. It was really unique. Like in one shot, you'll see Bloodsport cleaning a toilet seat, and the seat has soapy text on it where it says 3 days earlier, or like an elevator button near the end of the movie. It says Dirty Little Secrets, and they were cool ways to incorporate kind of chapter titles and show time jumps. I just thought it was a really great way to get people to pay attention more to the text without making it look very typical and average by just having regular text on the screen. So they did a really good job with that. That's kind of all my specific highlights that are spoilers that I can think about with the movie right now. So I'll just go on to say some things that I didn't particularly like about the movie, or things that I think could have been improved upon. So first of all, as I said before, I did not like the Harley Quinn romance scene with the president. I didn't think it was funny, it wasn't charming, it wasn't engaging me at all. I just had no interest in seeing Harley fall in love again. I think what bothered me is that it took so long for her to realise that he's not the right guy for her. It just seemed like she cared about his good looks and the fact that he's, you know, remotely interested in her. I would have much preferred it if she only spent the day with him just to gain his trust and murder him as part of the mission, like a way to deceive him to think, oh, she's really in love with me, and then bang, like, nope, I just did it as part of the mission. I mean, I know the whole point of the scene was to show that, you know, she's grown as a character since the first two movies, and sort of setting us, you know, it shows that she sets herself rules when meeting new guys. But I kind of think that message, or the way they showed that, could have been done way more effectively if you just kind of made the audience lead to believe that we were going to go into this stereotypical romance scene where she's falling in love with him, but then cut it off suddenly to find out she shot him because she was just deceiving him to get close and kill him, you know, to help with the mission. I think now we just need movies where Harley, you know, she's in a movie now that either makes no mention of her relationship issues with men, or let's just move her on and make her grow even more, and then move on to a new storyline where maybe, I don't know, at some point she meets Poison Ivy and forms a friendship with her, and eventually, across a few more movies down the line, she eventually gets her relationship from Poison Ivy that we've seen in the comics. So I just think, stop making her, like, have a thing with men. Even though in the Suicide Squad she does realise that she's going to get manipulated again, and she does realise this is a bad person to be with, it was just like, come on, like, you spent an entire day with him. Did you not learn from the last two movies? Like, I just thought it was a little annoying. Yeah, that was the one scene in the movie I was just like, I could totally do without this. We don't need this in the movie. You can keep elements of it, but I think a lot of it could have been cut down. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the one scene that I wasn't particularly keen on. But now let's move on to James Gunn hating birds, because a lot of birds die in this movie. And I know it's a bit of a nitpick, but I felt like it was a bit too much. The second time they kill birds, instead of killing one bird at the first, in the first scene of the movie, you know, there's another chunk in the middle of the movie where they just kill an entire cage of birds, and it was just like, really, like, what is this supposed to be, some kind of symbolism? Why are we killing birds so much? It's just a really weird thing to happen in this movie. If you killed other animals, I guess, I wouldn't think too much of it. I'd be like, well, I mean, this movie's R-rated and we're dealing with characters that are really ruthless, and very cruel. But like, for some reason, it just kept killing birds, and I didn't understand why James Gunn wanted to kill so many birds in this movie. I just thought the first scene with Savant killing the bird was the most effective use of that. But here, by the time they did it the second time, it just felt like they were doing it for the sake of showing, hey, look, we can do this in this movie. But it didn't really work for me the second time. It just felt a bit overkill. Another small issue I had was, even though Peacemaker does have an upcoming TV show, like they announced that before the movie was released, I wasn't that particularly keen with the end credit scene, because it reveals that he survived. The only reason that bothers me is because of the way he died, with a bullet to the throat in a building that was collapsing from Starro being released. I mean, it just seemed incredibly unlikely that he would have managed to survive long enough for someone to rescue him and bring him to the hospital. Because the way he apparently dies in the movie, I just thought, oh, I guess this TV show's a prequel. I mean, that's cool. I'm cool with that. But I think it was just slightly ruined by the fact he survived, and that's just based on the fact that there was no indication that in his state, by the time he's been shot in the neck, the state he's left in, I just thought it's a bit hard for me to believe that he would have survived and managed to get to a hospital. But hey, that's just me. Some other people might be fine with it, but I thought that kind of undermines that fight scene between Bloodsport and Peacemaker. But hey ho, it's just a little nitpick. And my final point of something that I wasn't particularly keen on, my final point would be that I would have liked to have seen the Thinker actually use his super intelligence. Like, throughout the whole movie, it's made clear that he's super smart and the bolts in his head increase his IQ, but we never actually see him do anything smart. I mean, all we get is a quick flashback of him in a lab coat. But you could have done more with that character, like at least give him one scene that demonstrates how impressive his IQ is. But hey ho, as I said earlier in the non-spoiler talk, if it wasn't for Peter Capaldi, that's literally a nitpick for me. But Peter Capaldi does such a good job in that role that I kind of didn't care. I was like, cool, yeah, you know what? Peter Capaldi's selling this character, and I will inherently believe that he is super smart. But for some people who maybe aren't familiar with Peter Capaldi, or even the Thinker, they might not get what the bolts in his head are for. Like, they might not realize how smart that character actually is. But hey ho, that's just the way it is, and it didn't ruin the movie for me. It was just a little tiny thing that kind of stood out a bit to me. But yeah, those were the four main things that I felt might have been able to be improved upon, or could have, been changed a bit. But other than that, The Suicide Squad is a great standalone movie that can be seen as a fantastic and superior sequel to the original, and it can be considered a refreshing reboot of the franchise as well. It doesn't rely on any universe building, it just does its own thing, and it's the most James Gunn movie I've ever seen. So let me just recap on my overall thoughts. I mean, I've seen this movie twice already, and I can't wait to own it on DVD. So, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you check it out. Even if you've stuck around to hear the spoiler talk, and you haven't seen the movie, still go check it out, because I don't think me talking about the spoilers even does the movie justice. I think when you see the movie, you'll realize how effective all this stuff really is, and how funny, and how, all the action scenes work really well, all the comedy works really well, all the little moments of drama and little emotional moments for the characters work really well. Like, honestly, even if you've heard all my spoilers and you haven't seen the movie, I still recommend you check it out, because I'm not doing it justice. But yeah, that's all I've got to say about the film. But please, let me know what your thoughts on the movie are in a spoiler-free way in the comments. Try not spoil anything, just in case people only stuck around to hear the non-spoiler talk. But yeah, I'd still be really curious to know what you liked and didn't like. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and until next time, stay safe.